So Gary Stauble was on Big Biller Summit 2010 and I just loved his presentation, and for him it was about strategies for eliminating distraction and working with laser-like focus. So I'm going to go through his bullet points. Firstly, it was about ruthlessly guarding your time. Secondly, getting control of your phone or making sure you don't get calls put through to you that are irrelevant. Thirdly, detoxing from email and getting control of your own inbox. Next one was utilising strategic stacking for registering candidates. Next was automating your willpower. I particularly liked that one. That was about getting a buddy system to somebody to kind of help you along with your goals. And lastly, it was about never leaving the office without a plan. So let's kick off. So he was talking about, in terms of getting on the phone and calling, people worked out that if they get in and they make calls between, in this instance, 7 and 8 or 8 and 9, and then between 4 and 5, they're going to get a lot more done than if they actually leave it to the middle of the day. People tend to be unavailable at prime work times, whereas if you call them early or maybe late, you're going to get hold of decision makers. Now, we've heard that all before, but it's just somebody else reinforcing that very fact. So, in terms of controlling your time, he calls it ruthlessly guarding your time. When you actually say yes to something, in reality you're giving up part of your life. Whether you agree to interview a candidate or whether you agree to visit with somebody that might just be a prospective opportunity, you're giving away a chunk of your life and essentially a chunk of your income. So what he's talking about is learning to be comfortable saying no. It's about you dictating how you work. And it's not about upsetting people's feelings. It's about making sure that you're very clear with people about how you spend your time. Now, they might not like it, but they'll probably respect you if you're upfront about that. So if we're looking at visits, are you going on a wild goose chase? Because by the time you've left the office, by the time you've prepared, you've left the office, you've travelled, you've gone to see the client, you've come back, are you really using your time most effectively? Now, obviously, if you've got a very good role that you've taken on and you've agreed terms of business, well, then it might be worth actually going to see your client, and I would advocate that, certainly in our business. But if it's going to be spending a whole day, travelling a couple of hours to see a client for a maybe opportunity, when you haven't qualified it hard to find out how urgent that role actually is, that could be a real waste of your time. He also talks about being very, very specific. If you have the opportunity to leave a message on somebody's voicemail, or you've got the opportunity to record a message on your mobile phone, he suggests that you're very clear about when you get people to call you back, telling people when you're available, rather than call me anytime. He talks about, that's equivalent to saying, kick me if you want. He's saying, be specific. The best time to call me is between 3 and 5 o'clock, for example. Or if it's somebody on an email, you can have an autoresponder to say, sorry, I'm not available right now, but you can contact me on a certain time or expect me to call you back during a certain period of time frame. He's also talking about working on the right assignment, and he talks about a favourite client he'd done a lot of work with, where he took a role on that wasn't really his speciality, wasn't his niche, and he nearly damaged that relationship. And because it was a retained client, he actually ended up giving the money back. But not only did he give the money back, he gave away a lot of, should we say, power and respect in that relationship. So be very, very careful what you work on. There's no point being jack of all trades, master of none. If you think you can't fill a position with a valued client, tell them. Obviously defer to somebody if you're not quite sure, but don't just grab anything. You might end up losing more business rather than gain it. So he's talking about learning how to say no. In terms of telephone calls coming in, if you're going to be on the phone, Gary recommends very strongly that we let our colleagues know that we're going to be on the phone for a couple of hours, or maybe in the back office making calls, and that calls should not be put through unless, absolutely unless, this is a client who you're recruiting for right now, you've got interviews going on, you're looking for clarification on a specific point. Just don't make yourself too accessible. Don't be so difficult to get hold of that you end up upsetting clients or indeed candidates, but make sure you can control your time a little bit more. He also talks about autoresponders on email, and we can set those up quite easily so that if somebody emails you, you can actually say on that email, I'm not available, expect a call back, or if it's urgent, ring my mobile number at a certain time. He also talks about people's concern if they don't answer the phone straight away, that clients will get upset. And he talks about the fact that actually this isn't the case. If you need to get through to a solicitor or an accountant or a surgeon, you're probably not going to get a call back straight away. It's about respecting that we're professionals as well, and we're adding a real value to the client relationship, and don't demean ourselves by being too available all the time. Also about educating your candidates. If you do leave a message for somebody and you're expecting a call back, just say to them, could you please call back with the appropriate information. What he hates is a call saying, hi, it's Susan, call me back. That doesn't really help. You then play telephone tag. Wherever possible, leave information and telephone numbers and get your candidates to do the same. So for him, email is probably the most disruptive thing that we have going on our desk. And he routinely suggests that we turn it off and that we just engage with it a couple of times a day. Invariably, if it's that important, the client will ring the office. But you might need to set up an autoresponder so people will know that you're not going to be turning it on all the time. And social media, for him, he views that as a great tool, a great resource, but we can get sucked into Facebook and LinkedIn and all the other wonderful social media platforms, and they can be quite dangerous. So again, great, use them for the tool they're intended for business, and then move off. Otherwise, before you know it, you spent half an hour looking at posts and looking at sites that quite frankly aren't going to help you put money on the table. You might have a lot of fun, but you'll probably be quite poor at the end of the month. He likes the idea of stacking candidate interviews, and I think this is a great idea. So rather than seeing people over, let's say, 3-4 days, he's advocating have a day whereupon you see all your candidates all in one go. It will take a little bit of organisation, a bit of planning, and you might not be able to do it all the time with all the candidates, particularly with people that come through the door. But if you can organise that, you get into the system, you get into the vibe, and effectively that means that you're really on top of it. And you haven't got to worry about ramping up and ramping down, maybe to do some client development work. Just do your candidate registrations on a certain day. Indeed, if you're also ringing candidates to talk about a particular vacancy, try and do those all at the same time, in the same way that you'll try and block together when you're making outgoing calls, talking to prospective clients. I thought it was quite amusing, but it makes sense. Obviously in America, big place, people can't always come to your office. He tends to set up in a city or in a town in Starbucks, and he'll get people coming in to see him. And he'll say, right, I'm going to be on the left by the front door. He puts a little name plaque on the table. He gets coffees laid up. But the most important thing is he tells people he's only going to be able to share with them 20 minutes of his time. So he'll qualify them hard in advance to make sure that within reason he knows exactly who they are when they're coming through the door. So no surprises. But he's got to make sure those people are out the door within 20 minutes. So he's got 10 minutes to prepare for the next candidate. You don't want to overrun with people a logjam backing up in Starbucks. He talks about the power of, or the psychology of automation. Now, there's a lot about that, and I think what he's talking about is setting goals and making sure that you've broken it down into specific activities. So if your target is to bill £10,000 a month, well, number one, how many placements is that? Number two, how many first interviews is that the previous month? And what he says is you get somebody on your side, you get a buddy, somebody you can work closely with, who kind of keeps you honest, who will sit down with you at the end of the week and say, so how did your week go? Now this is different to a one-to-one with your manager. This is about somebody else in the business, or it could be somebody outside of the business, who just keeps you on the straight and narrow, but who isn't going to let you off. And it might be nice if you had a relationship with somebody like that in the business, so you can both keep each other on the straight and narrow and very true. Otherwise you can get distracted, and before you know it, you've had 1, 2 or 3 weeks where you haven't hit your numbers, and guess what? You're not going to hit your goal, you're not going to hit your target. Now, If it's a holiday that you were looking forward to, it might not be the end of the world. But if it's a mortgage payment or maybe the lease on your car, that is significantly more important if you don't make it. And the last point he makes is plan the night before, in writing, in detail, and preferably print it out. And he talks about spending between 4 and 5 o'clock, or the last hour, whenever your day is, actually planning the next day. And he talks about getting somebody's name down and a telephone number and actually writing it, and then a few comments. And maybe if you've got a script, printing that out in advance so you're ready to go. If you get through to your candidates, you get through to your prospect or your client, you're ready to make your presentation. You're not sort of looking around the desk trying to get a notepad, trying to get your pitch, or trying to work out what you're going to say. You planned it in advance. And he talks particularly about the Friday afternoon. Plan a little bit more so that you've got, not only for Monday, you've got a bit of a view for the next week. And I think that's a really, really good piece of advice. He also talks about very, very simple systems. Whilst there's a great number of databases and customer records management systems, he says some of the biggest billers he's ever actually encountered and worked with, they've just used good old-fashioned A4 pads. They call them legal pads in America, and you just plan on paper and you tick things off. So you're a bit like a robot or some kind of machine. Tick, 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 in terms of knowing who you're going to ring the next day or the next week and what the outcome should be. So I have to say, I thought that was a really, really good session. I urge you to go back and listen to it in detail or grab the notes. But for me, that presentation by Gary Stauble was absolutely fabulous. Good luck.